My name is Claire Bennett, and the night my husband said, "You're overthinking, she's just my assistant," was the night I stopped pretending I didn't know. It happened at his company's annual party, while the band was finishing Fly Me to the Moon, while I held a glass I didn't want, while people who'd sat at our table for years pretended they hadn't heard him say it out loud. I smiled at him and said, "Then I guess she won't mind a little spotlight." That's the line everyone remembers. What I remember is his face confident, bored, sure I would let it slide like I always had. I didn't make a scene. I finished my drink, said hello to the CFO's wife, and thanked the caterer for the lemon bars. Mark moved through the room like he owned it. Emily, the assistant, stayed a step behind, nodding when he spoke to partners, laughing when he tossed an easy joke. When he introduced us, she called me Mrs. Bennett, the way young people do when they're deciding whether to respect you. I said she could call me Claire. She said, "That's sweet," and didn't. We left at 10. In the car, he drummed the steering wheel and talked about a merger as if we'd both been listening to the same speech. I said the party was nice. He said the scallops were overcooked. We rode the elevator to the 10th floor like any couple who's had a long night and is ready to be quiet. At the door, he kissed my forehead and said, "Don't let them get to you." That meant, "Don't let me get to you." He turned on the TV and fell asleep in the chair. I stood in the kitchen and stared at the microwave clock until it changed. The next morning, I sat up before the alarm. He was whistling in the shower. I made coffee, 2 mugs the way I always did his, with sugar mine plain. I put the mugs on the table and waited. He kissed the top of my head and said he had an early call. The apartment door clicked. I listened to the hallway go quiet. Then I opened my laptop. Years ago, before I took a break to focus on family, I ran communications for his company employee newsletters, town halls, holiday parties. My login still worked on the events server. No one had ever thought to remove it. I went to the folder labeled with last night's date. There were camera angles for the ballroom, the stage, the catering corridor, the back hallway that led to the service elevator. I clicked through feeds the way you flip TV channels. People cheered, people ate, people shook hands. At 9:42 p.m., on the camera above the back hallway, Mark and Emily stepped out of a side door. He adjusted her necklace. She straightened his tie like they were married and late to dinner. He leaned in. You couldn't hear what he said, but you didn't need to. I watched the clip twice. The second time, I felt my jaw unclench. Not rage confirmation. I saved the 10 seconds that mattered and named it like a budget slide. QQ4 event, shotcam7.move. I copied it to a thumb drive and emailed it to myself under a subject line about seating charts. Then I logged out and scrubbed the browser history like you do when you're done with a recipe and ready to clean the kitchen. He texted at noon lunch with Johnson. Don't wait. I texted back, okay. There was nothing else to say. That afternoon, I drove to the office tower and sat in the lobby cafe with the tea I didn't drink. People who knew me said hello. People who didn't look twice and looked away. When the AV manager came down for a coffee, I stood up. Hey, Mike, I said. He blinked surprise, then smiled like we had spoken yesterday instead of last year. We traded small talk, new software, new screens, same headaches. When he asked how I was, I said, "Can you check a detail for me?" I told him I'd consult on a future event and wanted to see the updated LED input. He pulled up a diagram on his tablet and walked me through the inputs. HDMI 1 for slides 2, for video 3, for live camera. Still the same, he said. Reliable as ever. I nodded. That was all I needed. Back home, I folded laundry and made pasta. When Mark arrived, he looked surprised by dinner. He kissed my cheek and said, "That's nice." We ate in front of the news. When the weather came on, he said I shouldn't have snapped last night. I waited. He added, "You know how people are. They hear what they want." I said I heard you. He said you're overthinking. He smiled. I smiled back. The conversation ended with dishes. For 2 days, I practiced telling myself I might be wrong. I moved through the house, touching surfaces like I could change the story by wiping them. Then on Thursday, the email arrived. Annual celebration, final AV run-through. The event would be next month. Mark would speak. The LED wall would run a new video package about values, leadership, and trust. The irony landed by itself. I didn't have to push it. Friday morning, I called HR to confirm my volunteer slot on the event crew. I had helped for years. No one blinked. "We're glad to have you back," the coordinator said. "You know how everything works." I said I did. I didn't tell her that was the problem. At dinner with my sister that night, I told her what I planned to do. She looked at me for a long time and asked if I was sure. "He made the story public," I said. "I'm just letting the room hear the ending." She squeezed my hand across the table hard enough to hurt and said, "Then don't miss." Over the next weeks, Mark acted like a man in a commercial for a happy marriage. He brought flowers. He sent me a link to a vacation rental we couldn't afford. He asked me what I thought of new suits. He said Emily was moving to a different team. He said it like he was doing me a favor. I said that sounded smart. He kissed my forehead like he'd solved something. The day of the event, I wore a red dress and low heels. I checked in with the AV crew and ran cables and tested mics. I learned the names of 2 interns and showed them how to coil cords without breaking them. Mark arrived late on purpose the way speakers do when they want to be seen. He walked the room like a candidate working a rope line. People laughed too hard at a joke about budgets. Emily stood with the marketing group and didn't look our way. I didn't look hers. Backstage at 7:18 p.m., I reviewed the run of show with the stage manager. At 7:24, the CEO finished his toast. At 7:25, the lights dipped. At 7:26, Mark stepped up to the podium and said the line I knew he'd use, "This company is built on trust." I stood at the AV station with a headset around my neck and the video switcher under my hand. The intern to my left watched the program feed on a small monitor. On screen, a slide read, "Teamwork, integrity, vision." I cued the next asset, HDMI 2. The clip rolled. Not long, not graphic. 10 seconds of a hallway and 2 people who were supposed to be somewhere else, enough for a room to understand. The sound that followed was not a gasp, it was the absence of a gasp. He froze. Emily vanished. The CEO set down his glass the way people do when their hands need something to do. I didn't speak into a microphone, I didn't look at him. I just stood there and let the silence do what it does best, make space for truth. When the clip ended, the slide returned. Teamwork, integrity, vision. No one applauded. Mark said my name once, like maybe it would save him. It didn't. I walked to the back, set my headset on the table, and picked up my coat. On my way out, I passed the table of spouses. One of them, someone who'd sat next to me at too many dinners, caught my hand. "You okay?" she whispered. I said I will be, and I meant it. That's part 1. Not the fallout, not the paperwork, not the speeches later about values. Just the moment when the truth stopped being mine alone to carry. People call it revenge. Fine, I call it returning something that never belonged to me, his story, back to the room where he'd chosen to tell it. Mark didn't speak to me for 2 days after the party. That wasn't unusual. Silence was one of his favorite weapons. No yelling, no slammed doors, just the steady withdrawal of warmth until I came crawling back, apologizing for a crime I hadn't committed. I didn't crawl this time. I filled the house with noise, instead music vacuum cleaners, the steady rhythm of a life that didn't need his permission to exist. He texted on Wednesday afternoon dinner tonight thinking Italian. I stared at the screen for a full minute before typing, "Sure, 7's fine." By the time he came home, I'd already chosen the dress. Not something new, he'd noticed that, but one he used to compliment before compliments turned into corrections. I wore his favorite perfume, the one he'd once said smelled like loyalty. I set the table, opened a bottle of red, and waited for him to play his part. He arrived at 7:15, holding a small box. "Peace offering," he said, setting it in front of me. Inside was a silver bracelet. Beautiful, expensive, and entirely wrong. "You don't have to," I started. He cut me off. "Claire." I overreacted. "Emily just got nervous when you brought up the travel schedule. You made it weird. I made it weird." He smiled, the tight kind meant to close a subject. "You know how women get around you intimidated. I think she wanted to impress you." That's the moment I realized he didn't even believe his own excuses anymore. They weren't designed to convince me. They were designed to maintain control. After dinner, he went to his office to catch up on emails. I cleaned up slowly, listening to him hum. That's what he did when he was lying. Little hums between clicks like background music for deceit. Thursday morning, I woke early again. The footage from the party sat on the thumb drive in my jewelry box right next to my wedding ring. I'd stopped wearing it after the first time he called me paranoid. That word had stripped something out of me, made me smaller, quieter. But I wasn't small now, not anymore. At 10, I drove to the company headquarters again. Officially, I was helping finalize the event setup for the quarterly all-hands meeting. Unofficially, I was studying everything, the lighting, the timing, the access points to the AV system. Mike, the tech lead, was thrilled to have me back. "You always made things run smoother," he said, grinning. I smiled, thinking how true that would be one last time. When I got home, Mark was on a call pacing. He said transparency 3 times in 2 minutes. That word echoed in the hall while I took laundry from the dryer, the heat from the fabric mixing with the cold inside me. Friday, we hosted friends. I watched him charm them all. The men laughed at his stories. The women admired his career. He never mentioned me, not once. The assistant texted during dessert, his phone lit up with her name. I pretended not to see. Saturday, he kissed my cheek before leaving for a golf weekend. I asked which course. "The one in Montauk," he said. "You wouldn't like it too windy." After he left, I opened the laptop again. The footage played on loop, a 10-second truth that weighed more than every lie he'd ever told. Then I opened the company calendar. The next corporate event was 3 weeks away, the annual Leadership Awards, streamed live for all employees. Perfect. The next 2 weeks became rehearsal. I memorized schedules, contacts, and contingency plans. I double-checked every technical route into that LED wall. I bought a second flash drive, one for the original file, one for the backup. Then I called a lawyer. "No rush," I said, "but if someone needed to end a marriage quietly, what's the timeline?" The lawyer's voice was calm, like he'd heard the question 1,000 times. "Depends," he said. "Quiet endings need careful timing. Public ones, well, those move faster." At night, I lay beside Mark and listened to him breathe. Sometimes he'd murmur another woman's name in his sleep, once not even hers, but mine, like his mind was shuffling lies too quickly to keep track. I started sleeping in the guest room. The morning of the Leadership Awards, he was radiant. New suit, new watch, same cologne. "You're coming tonight, right?" he asked. "Spouses sit in the front this year." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. He left early. I stayed home for a while, just sitting at the kitchen counter, staring at my hands. I thought of every dinner I'd cooked, every apology I'd made, every time I'd stayed silent, so he could look powerful in front of other people. Then I picked up my purse, slid the flash drive inside, and headed downtown. At the venue, the same AV team greeted me warmly. "Claire, we missed you." "I missed this," I said, and I meant it. I missed being the one in control. By 6 p.m., the ballroom shimmered with champagne light. By 6:30, the guests arrived in waves of designer suits and sequins. At 6:55, I was in position. Mark walked on stage at 7:00 sharp. Tonight, he said, we celebrate integrity. It took everything not to laugh. I nodded at Mike, who signaled for the cue list. When the final slide of the presentation reached integrity in action, I leaned over the console and said, "Let's show them what that looks like." He didn't question it. He hit play. And that's when everything that had been rotting beneath the surface finally broke open for everyone to see. When the first frame appeared, the room was still humming laughter, silverware, clinking glasses. Then came the sound, his voice, low, familiar, intimate in a way it never was at home anymore. "Leave the reports. I'll stay late and help you finish them," Mark said on camera, leaning far too close to his assistant Emily. They were in his office, the same desk where he'd once told me he built everything from the ground up. The image on the LED screen was crystal clear, high definition, time-stamped, 2 nights before his golf trip. I saw the moment recognition dawned on faces across the ballroom. The room stilled like someone had vacuumed the oxygen out. Mark froze mid-sentence on stage. He tried to keep going, improvising. "Oh, looks like a technical glitch, folks." But the video didn't stop. Emily's laugh filled the room, light nervous, coated with flirtation. Then the camera caught him touching her arm, then her face, then the unmistakable sound of a door locking. The collective gasp that followed was almost musical. He lunged for the console, but the tech crew had stepped back, unsure what was happening. He shouted something about privacy lawsuits, defamation. I stood in the aisle, calm, composed, the eye of the storm. When security finally managed to pause the video, the room didn't move. No one clapped. No one spoke. People just stared at us. Mark scanned the crowd until his eyes found me. He looked like a man watching the last seconds of his reputation burn down. "Claire," he said, voice trembling but still trying to command. "We'll talk about this at home." I smiled. "There's nothing left to talk about, Mark." The footage said enough. Whispers spread like wildfire. Someone near the bar muttered, "Jesus, that was her husband." Another voice, "That's the VP's assistant." Mike, bless him, leaned toward the microphone and announced, "Let's take a brief intermission." Half the audience didn't even wait. They rushed out to the hallway phones, already out, recording, tweeting, whispering. I walked out 2 steady heels, clicking against the marble like punctuation. In the corridor, Mark grabbed my arm. "Are you insane?" he hissed. "You just destroyed my career." I looked at his hand on my sleeve until he dropped it. "Correction," I said quietly. "You destroyed your career. I just made sure you couldn't hide the wreckage." He exhaled sharply, scanning the crowd. "You think this makes you righteous? You humiliated me in front of everyone." "Funny," I said, "that's how betrayal feels too. Just without the microphone." He started to say something else, but a colleague passed by and avoided his eyes. Then another, and another. His phone buzzed messages from his boss, no doubt, the corporate machine moving faster than guilt. I left him there, standing under those hotel lights that suddenly made him look older, smaller. Outside, the air was cold and clean. I didn't cry, didn't shake, I just breathed. By midnight, the video was everywhere. Someone had recorded the screen before security pulled the plug. "VP caught cheating during company gala," the caption wrote itself. By morning, there were memes. By noon, HR had issued a statement. "We take ethical conduct seriously and have begun an internal review." Translation, he was finished. My phone buzzed with texts, some supportive, some curious. "Are you okay? Did you really plan it? Is it true?" I ignored them all. Instead, I made coffee, fed the cat, and watched the son hit the same kitchen counter where I'd once sliced fruit for his breakfast meetings. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet. It felt like exhaling after holding your breath for years. That afternoon, his mother called. "Claire, dear, I don't know what's happened, but ask your son," I said gently. He finally told the truth, just not the way he intended. Then I packed a bag. Not all of it, just enough to remind myself I could leave. Passport, credit cards, one photo of my father who'd always said, "When a man disrespects you in public, never settle it in private." By evening, I checked into a small hotel downtown. The clerk recognized me not from the tabloids, but from the old company charity events I used to organize before my husband decided my ambitions were bad optics. "Rough night," he asked, offering the room key. I smiled faintly. Long time coming. In the quiet of that hotel room, I finally cried. Not out of regret, but release. I thought about the women who'd sat through dinners, smiled through betrayals, swallowed their anger because good wives don't make scenes. And I realized that sometimes making a scene is exactly what justice looks like. When the tears stopped, I opened my laptop. The footage link had over 500,000 views. The comments were split, half horrified, half cheering. One said she turned the whole corporate gala into Judgment Day. I closed it exhausted. The adrenaline had finally worn off, leaving behind a silence that wasn't empty, but cleansing. On the nightstand sat my wedding ring, still off my finger. I didn't hate it. I just didn't belong to it anymore. Tomorrow would bring lawyers' statements, maybe even reporters. But tonight was mine. For the first time in years, truly mine. By Monday morning, my husband was headline material. Not the Forbes 40 under 40 kind. No, this was the kind that made HR departments panic and PR firms bill overtime. VP's affair exposed during corporate gala. I didn't even have to read the full articles. The screenshots and clips were everywhere. At 8:04 a.m., my phone buzzed nonstop emails from reporters, a few from old coworkers and one from Mark. The subject line, "Please, just that." I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I poured coffee and stepped out onto the balcony of my hotel room. The city looked different from up here, colder maybe, but honest. I could see the company tower from a distance, the glass catching the morning light like nothing had happened inside it. but something had. At 8:30, my phone buzzed again. This time it was an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Bennett. The voice was crisp professional. This is Sheila from Corporate Communications. We'd like to request a statement to clarify your involvement in Friday night's incident. Clarify, I asked, keeping my tone neutral. You mean spin. There was a pause long enough to hear the soft hum of her office. We'd prefer to handle this quietly. I'm sure you would, I said. But I'm not your employee, Sheila. I don't take your talking points. When I hung up, I finally opened Mark's email. Claire, you've made your point. Please don't say anything to the press. Let me fix this before it gets worse. You know what this job means to me. I stared at the words until they blurred. He was still trying to manage optics, not remorse. Still the same man who measured life in titles and dinner invitations. At noon, I checked out of the hotel and drove to our house, not because I missed it, but because closure requires seeing the battlefield one last time. The neighborhood was quiet, all manicured lawns and SUVs. A few curtains twitched as I parked. People always pretend they're not watching, but they are. Inside, the air smelled stale. I walked through each room like a museum of illusions, the dining table that had hosted endless networking dinners, the couch where he'd fallen asleep scrolling through his assistant's messages. Then I saw it, the silver bracelet he'd given me as a peace offering sitting on the counter, still polished, still meaningless. I left it there. Around 2 p.m., I got a call from my friend Nora. She worked in HR, different company, but same world. Claire, she said softly, it's everywhere. They suspended him this morning. Internal ethics review pending termination. Good, I said. Then after a pause, how's Emily? On leave. Voluntary, apparently. Though I heard legal's involved. That footage violated policy. I laughed short and bitter. So he can violate me for months, but I violate policy. Nora didn't answer. What could she say? By Tuesday, lawyers were circling. One called to offer representation for any potential defamation claims. Another wanted an interview for a documentary on workplace power dynamics. America loves redemption arcs, especially when they can film them. But I wasn't ready to become a story. Not yet. Wednesday morning brought flowers. White lilies, my least favorite. No card, but I didn't need one. Mark's apologies always came with expensive silence. I left them on the doorstep for the wind to handle. At 10 a.m., I sat with a divorce attorney named Elaine. Her office was minimalist efficient. She listened without interruption as I recounted the last year, the late nights, the lies, the moment I hit play. When I finished, she said, "You're remarkably calm." "I've been angry long enough," I replied. "Now I'm just done." She nodded, scribbling notes. "You've already done the hardest part, deciding it's over. The rest is logistics." That afternoon, I signed the preliminary papers. My hand didn't shake. That evening, he called. I let it ring twice before answering. "Claire," he said, voice rough, almost pleading. "I'm ruined. They're firing me Friday. Can we talk? Just face to face." "About what?" "Us. About everything. Please." I almost said no, but curiosity, the need for final clarity, made me agree. Tomorrow, noon, at the diner on 8th. He showed up early, of course. The same suit from the gala minus the confidence. His tie was gone. His eyes were bloodshot. "You win," he said as soon as I sat down. "Are you happy?" "No," I said quietly, "but I'm free." He leaned forward. "You think you're the hero here? You humiliated me in front of hundreds of people?" I met his eyes. "And you humiliated me in front of one woman every day for a year. I just matched the scale." He flinched but recovered fast. "You could have talked to me. We could have worked through it." I sipped my coffee. "You worked through your assistant instead." He sighed long and defeated. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "you deal with consequences, and I start over." He laughed bitterly. "You think anyone will forget what you did? You embarrassed me publicly." "Correction," I said, standing. "I told the truth publicly. That's different." He called after me as I left. I didn't look back. By Friday, he was officially terminated. HR issued another sterile statement about upholding company values. The irony nearly made me choke. The media moved on by Sunday, new scandals, fresher prey. But for me, the quiet after was louder than the chaos before. I went for walks. long ones. Past the coffee shop where we used to sit on Saturdays, past the office building where everything had started. People looked at me differently now, not as Mark's wife, but as the woman who refused to stay silent. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. The Monday after his termination, I woke to a world that didn't need me to pretend anymore. No alarm blaring for his meetings, no careful breakfast ritual, no rehearsed goodbye kiss. The house was still unnervingly so, but it wasn't hostile silence this time. It was clean. My lawyer Elaine emailed at 9 a.m. sharp preliminary divorce, filing accepted. He's been served. I stared at that single sentence for a long time. He's been served. Such a small phrase for something that rewrote your life. An hour later, my phone lit up with unknown numbers, reporters again mostly. One from a morning talk show left a voicemail. Claire America wants to hear from you. You've struck a chord with working women everywhere. I deleted it. Then another came, in this one from the Beacon Journal, the local paper that had once run a story about Mark's meteoric rise. Now they wanted mine. You don't have to talk about the scandal, the reporter said softly. Just how you found the courage. Courage, as if it was a single choice instead of 100 small ones. Every swallowed argument, every time I smiled through humiliation, each moment was a quiet rehearsal for the one where I finally stopped. I didn't respond, not yet. That afternoon, I visited my parents for the first time since everything blew up. My mother opened the door with a cautious smile, like I might crumble if she breathed wrong. You look thinner, she said, her way of saying you look tired. My father just nodded. Coffee, please. They didn't ask about Mark. Maybe they didn't need to. The silence between them said enough, a blend of shame, pride, and disbelief, that their daughter had become a viral headline. Over dinner, Mom finally said, I don't know whether to hug you or scold you. Why not both? I smiled faintly. She set her fork down. You embarrassed him, Claire, but he deserved it. God help me, he deserved every second. Dad grunted his agreement. Man like that needs to learn humiliation's a teacher. The next morning, I woke up to an email from an old colleague, someone who'd left the company years ago. You don't know how many of us wish we'd had your guts. That place needed a wake-up call. I read it twice, then closed my laptop. The week passed slowly. Reporters stopped calling. The internet found new scandals. I spent hours walking along the river, relearning what quiet sounded like when it wasn't suffocating. By Friday, I found myself outside a bookstore I used to visit before I married Mark. The owner, Denise, recognized me immediately. Claire Bennett. She said, eyebrows raised. Or do you go by your maiden name again? Carson, I said, almost surprised at how easily it came back. She smiled and handed me a coffee. On the house, I saw the clip. You've got ice in your veins, girl. My ex cheated. I threw a toaster. You used a LED wall. We both laughed, real laughter this time, the kind that doesn't echo off fear. That night I sat in the living room, surrounded by boxes. Not of his things, those were gone, but mine. Sketchbooks, notes from old projects, dreams I'd shelved. I found a folder labeled Event Proposals 2015. My handwriting was hopeful then, the kind of woman who thought she'd build something meaningful. By midnight, I'd outlined a plan, not revenge creation, a consulting firm for workplace ethics and event PR. The irony wasn't lost on me. I registered the domain the next morning. Integrity Works. Within a week, inquiries started trickling in. Small businesses, nonprofits, people who wanted to host events without turning into a headline. My first client was a women's foundation in Boston. They wanted a keynote speaker, someone who could talk about transparency. The irony made me laugh out loud. Still, I accepted. The night before the trip, I got another email from Mark. Short, restrained. I signed the papers. You win. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I never thought you'd actually do it. I typed back, I never thought you'd make me have to. Then deleted it. Silence was stronger. 2 weeks later, I stood on a stage again, this time under my own name. The room was smaller, maybe 200 people, mostly women my age and older. The moderator introduced me as a woman who turned betrayal into empowerment. I almost laughed. Empowerment was too shiny a word for what really happened. What I did wasn't polished or inspirational. It was messy, raw, necessary. When I spoke, I didn't dramatize it. No metaphors, no heroics, just truth. I didn't play that video for revenge, I told them. I played it because pretending was killing me faster than his betrayal ever could. The room went still, not out of shock, but understanding. Afterward, a woman in her 60s came up, tears in her eyes. You reminded me that it's never too late to stop letting someone rewrite your story. That night, I sat in my hotel room, different city, same skyline glow, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not triumph, not even closure, just peace. The world kept spinning. My story became old news archived under scandals that sparked change. But I wasn't a headline anymore. I was a person again. And in a quiet moment, I realized revenge wasn't the end of my story. It was just how I took the pen back. By the time fall arrived, the noise had settled into something else entirely, a kind of quiet notoriety. People didn't whisper anymore. They nodded. Strangers at conferences, women in grocery store lines, even a barista once said softly, "You're the woman who showed the video, right?" Then after a pause, "Good for you." I never knew what to say. Good for me sounded too simple for something that cost me a marriage and a decade of pretending. But life had rhythm again. Real rhythm. Morning jogs by the river, late-night phone calls with Nora dinners that didn't involve waiting for someone's lies to cool. I worked, I slept, I existed, all without apology. Then came the email that would test whether I'd really moved on. Subject Corporate Ethics Conference, keynote invitation. The sender, a familiar company name, Marks. For a moment I thought it was a joke, or worse, bait. But the sender wasn't him, it was the new HR director. She wanted me to speak at their leadership summit on building trust in a transparent workplace. I stared at the screen until I started laughing. Real, startled laughter. Of course. The company that had buried its own scandals now wanted to wear ethics like perfume. Still, I said yes. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because closure doesn't always come from distance. Sometimes it comes from walking straight back into the room where everything broke and realizing nothing in there can hurt you anymore. The day of the conference felt eerily familiar. Same hotel ballroom, same LED walls. But the energy was different, less champagne, more self-awareness. The event coordinator greeted me warmly, unaware of the irony. "We're honored to have you, Ms. Carson." "Claire is fine," I said. The schedule showed my talk slotted just before the CEO's address. Perfect symmetry. 10 months after my husband's downfall, I'd be standing in the same spotlight, only this time I owned it. When I took the stage, I scanned the audience. Faces I didn't recognize, some I did. A few avoided eye contact, remembering. Good. Let them remember. 10 months ago, I began this room looked a lot like it does today. People smiling, networking, clinking glasses, while a truth waited behind a locked door. Silence spread through the rows. Not tension, just attention. "I'm not here to relive that night," I continued, "but to remind you what happens when image replaces integrity. You can polish a lie until it gleams, but under bright light, it always cracks." Someone in the back nodded slowly. A woman near the aisle whispered to the man beside her. I took a breath. Forgiveness is optional. Accountability isn't. Applause started hesitant, then swelled. Not wild cheering, just genuine respect. Afterward, people approached me quietly, not with pity, but gratitude. One young woman said, "My boss has been crossing lines for months. I didn't know how to fight back. You reminded me I can." I thanked her, wished her strength, and meant it. As I was leaving, a familiar voice stopped me. "Claire." Mark stood by the doorway, older, thinner eyes sunken. No suit, no aura of command, just a man without the scaffolding of his lies. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said softly. "Apparently, HR didn't either," I replied. He tried a small smile. "You look good." "I am good." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I lost everything." "You didn't lose it," I said. "You handed it away." He looked down his fingers, fidgeting with a paper cup. "I'm getting help. Therapy, accountability coaching, whatever it's called. I guess I just wanted to say I understand now. What I did. What I made you do." I studied him for a moment. There was no satisfaction in seeing him broken. No vindication left to claim, only distance the kind that heals. I hope you mean that, I said quietly, because you'll need to understand it every day from now on. He nodded again. Take care, Claire. I walked past him without looking back. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I was walking towards something else entirely. That night back in my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. The city buzzed below alive and indifferent proof that life keeps moving, no matter how loudly it collapses for you. I checked my calendar. 3 more speaking events. A consulting contract with a nonprofit, a dinner invitation from someone knew Daniel, an investigative journalist I'd met at a panel weeks ago. He'd seen everything, of course, but never brought it up. When he asked me out, he just said, I like how you pause before you answer, like you weigh the truth. I smiled at the memory. The truth had become my compass. It had cost me, burned me, rebuilt me. But it was mine now, no longer something to defend, just something to live by. I raised the glass slightly, a private toast to the reflection staring back. To integrity, I murmured. The most expensive gift I ever gave myself. Outside, a billboard flickered with some new company slogan about transparency. I laughed under my breath. They were all chasing it now, the thing I'd learned the hardest way possible. But that was fine. Let them chase it. I'd already caught it. Winter came early that year, the kind that painted the windows with frost and made everything sound softer. My apartment had finally started to feel like mine. No more ghosts in the closet, no aftershave on the pillow, no phantom footsteps in the hall. Just me, my cat, and the low hum of the city outside. The firm Integrity Works was growing faster than I expected. Not because of marketing, I hadn't even built a proper website yet, but because word spread. Women from tech firms, law offices, nonprofits called me. Not for revenge, but for boundaries. How did you do it without losing yourself, they'd ask. I told them the truth. I did lose myself. I just refused to stay lost. By February, I was consulting 3 clients and speaking at leadership programs every other weekend. There was something almost ironic about helping companies build ethical cultures when I'd watched one rot from the inside. But I found purpose in the irony. Sometimes at events, people still whispered my story like folklore, the woman who hit play. I didn't correct them, let them tell it however they needed to. My truth had already been told once loud enough for a lifetime. And then there was Daniel. He wasn't the kind of man who filled silence, he respected it. We met for coffee one afternoon that stretched into dinner, then a walk by the river where the city lights looked like a reflection of something steadier inside me. He never asked about Mark directly. Just once when the conversation drifted close, he said, You seem like someone who's seen the worst of people and still believes in decency. Some days I admitted. Other days I just believe in consequences. He laughed softly. Same thing if you think about it. We kept seeing each other slow, deliberate. No fireworks, no chaos, just quiet honesty. After years of lies disguised as affection, truth felt almost romantic. But the universe doesn't let you rebuild without testing the foundation. One Sunday morning, I opened my inbox and saw an email from a journalist, Mark Bennett, files defamation suit. For a moment, my chest went hollow. Then I exhaled. I knew this man. He wasn't seeking justice. He was seeking control, one last performance to prove he still had power. I forwarded the message to Elaine, my lawyer. Her reply came 10 minutes later. He doesn't have a case. Let him burn more money on the illusion of innocence. The court filing became public within days. It was everywhere again, the recycled headline machine churning out updates for clicks. Daniel sent me a simple text, "Want me to handle the press?" I replied, "No need. I'll handle him the same way I always do with receipts." And I did. We submitted timestamps documents, proof of every moment he claimed was fabricated. Within a month, his case was dismissed. The judge's summary said at best truth requires no defense. That sentence stayed with me for weeks. Truth requires no defense. It became my mantra. I printed it, framed it, and hung it above my desk. Mark didn't contact me again after that. Not directly, but one day his mother sent a handwritten letter. Her cursive was careful, old-fashioned. "He's not the man I raised, Claire. I hope you find peace. I'm sorry you had to find it this way." I folded the letter gently, not out of forgiveness, but respect for the one person who hadn't chosen to lie. By April, my world had shifted again. Not dramatically, just small recalibrations toward normalcy. I joined a book club. I learned how to cook again for no one but myself. I started volunteering at a local shelter on weekends, helping women navigating divorce and financial abuse. When one of them asked how I knew what to say, I smiled. Experience, I told her, and a really expensive therapist. She laughed the kind of laugh that breaks tension. I recognized the beginning of her healing, that shaky humor that comes when pain starts to lose its grip. Daniel and I took a weekend trip to the coast that May. The sea was calm, the sand cold, but clean. Over dinner, he asked, "Do you ever think about revenge now?" I thought for a long moment. "No," I said finally. Revenge was just the doorway. Healing's the house I built after walking through it. He reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "Then it's a hell of a house." I looked out at the horizon, quiet, vast, and endless, and realized something I hadn't before. I didn't just survive the fire. I'd learned how to control it. That night, as waves hit the shore below our balcony, I whispered a small prayer, not for vengeance, not for apology, but for gratitude. Gratitude that the worst thing that ever happened to me had also been the thing that set me free. Summer returned the same week. The final divorce decree arrived in the mail. A thin envelope, plain white, no fanfare. Just a quiet confirmation that the man who once promised forever was now legally a stranger. I didn't cry. Didn't celebrate either. I made tea, sat by the open window, and watched sunlight hit the steam rising from the cup. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't arrive like thunder. It slips in when you finally stop expecting it. A few hours later, I went downtown to sign a new client for Integrity Works, a construction firm of all things. The CEO, a gruff man in his 60s, said, "My daughter sent me that clip of yours months ago. Told me, 'Dad, this is why we need an ethics officer.'" He grinned. "Guess you started a movement." Just a conversation, I corrected softly. But as I walked back to my car, I thought maybe it was a movement. A quiet one. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't trend, but keeps echoing through the lives of people who've been told to keep their heads down and stay polite while being betrayed. That night, Daniel cooked dinner. Actual dinner. He was a disaster in the kitchen, burned garlic, dropped the pasta. But when I laughed, it wasn't the kind that came from irony or defense. It was real. The kind that tastes like oxygen after years underwater. Later, as we sat on the balcony, he asked, "Do you ever miss it? The life before all of this?" I looked out at the skyline, all those glittering windows filled with people pretending everything's fine. "No," I said. "I miss who I thought I was in that life. But she's gone. And honestly, she needed to be." He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Before bed, I checked my email one last time. A message from someone named Rachel M., no subject line, just a few short lines that stopped me cold. "I work at your husband's old company. I saw what happened last year. I didn't say anything then, but he wasn't the only one. I'm gathering women willing to speak up. Could you help us?" For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. The past resurfacing not as pain, but as purpose. I typed back slowly. "Yes, tell me what you need." I didn't feel anger or even pity, just clarity. The story that had begun with humiliation was becoming something else, a ripple turning into a wave. A few months later, I found myself standing outside the same hotel where everything had started. The LED screen, the gasps, the collapse. But this time, it was different. I wasn't there for revenge or closure. The company had asked me to train their new HR executives. When I walked into that ballroom, it smelled of fresh paint and new money, like they'd tried to scrub away the ghosts. One of the new managers, a young woman with bright, nervous eyes, whispered, "You were here that night, weren't you?" I smiled. "Yes, but tonight we build something better." During my session, I said something that wasn't in the notes. People always ask why I didn't just leave quietly. Why make it public? The answer's simple, because silence protects power. And sometimes the only way to break the system is to make it watch itself fall apart. They didn't clap right away. They just sat there listening, really listening. And that meant more than any applause. That fall, Integrity Works hosted its first official seminar. Over 100 attendees, mostly women, a few men brave enough to sit in the front row. We called it The Power of Knowing. I opened with a confession. I used to think revenge was the opposite of forgiveness, but it's not. The opposite of forgiveness is pretending. Revenge just ends the pretending. The room went quiet again. That silence, the heavy, shared kind, had become my favorite sound. When it was over, I walked outside. The evening air was warm, sweet, with the smell of rain. Daniel met me on the corner, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You still get nervous before you speak?" he asked. Every time I said, "But now I know that's a good thing. Means I still care." He smiled, handing me the cup. "Then keep caring. The world's finally listening." We stood there for a while, watching the streetlights flicker on, one by one. Somewhere behind us, laughter spilled out of the hotel doors, someone else's celebration. Life moving forward. Back home, I took the framed line from the judge's ruling. Truth requires no defense, and hung it above the doorway instead of my desk. It felt right there at the threshold, a reminder to carry it with me wherever I walked next. Then I picked up my journal and wrote the last entry of that chapter. A year ago, I thought revenge was my ending, but it was just the spark. The real story was everything that came after rebuilding, forgiving myself, learning to speak without fear. The truth didn't destroy me, it freed me. And freedom, I've learned, doesn't whisper. It roars softly and never stops. I closed the journal and turned off the light. If this story found you when you needed strength, share it. If it reminded you that silence is never safety, pass it on. And if you're still waiting for your moment to stand up, know this: you don't need permission to stop pretending. You only need the courage to hit play.